The courtroom at Naval Station Norfolk tried hard to look ceremonial and ended up feeling clinical. Brass plaques gleamed, wood paneling shone. The flag hung exactly where the handbook said it should hang. None of it offered warmth. Fluorescent lights hummed. A camera in the corner blinked red, without blinking at all. Lieutenant Commander Revere Callaway sat at the defense table, as if the seat had been measured to fit her spine. Dress blues perfect, collar points aligned, ribbons aligned as carefully as teeth. When she breathed, it was steady. When she moved, it was minimal. The only motion she allowed herself was the slow graze of her right thumb over an old pale seam in her left palm, a scar that caught the light like a piece of fishing line. She didn't look at it. She didn't have to. On the screens mounted high along the walls, the prosecution's exhibit rolled. Gray-toned satellite feeds of a compound ringed with shadow and heat. Thermal ghosts moved along roofs and alleys. A transcript scrolled beneath the imagery, time codes marching in precise columns. "Let the record reflect the evidence being displayed," said Colonel Augustine Hargrove. He had the measured baritone of a man accustomed to people writing down the things he said. His hair was sober, his shoes more so. The ribbons on his chest told a story of campaigns, but his hands told the story of paperwork, neat, dry, controlled. He raised a palm, and the audio joined the video. Clipped voices threaded through static. "Mantis Actual, you are cleared hot. Execute. Execute." A beat. Then Callaway's voice, low, even professional. "Negative command. Cannot comply. Request immediate stand down." Hargrove let the words breathe in the room, as if he were airing out a wound. "Members of the tribunal," he said, "you hear it. A direct refusal during an active operation." At the bench, Judge Advocate General Harrison Blake watched without blinking. His face wore the practiced neutrality of a man who made a career out of pretending not to have reactions, but contempt had a way of leaking. It showed at the corners of his mouth when he looked at Callaway, the way a smudge reveals the direction of a thumbprint. Major Alara Winfield stood for the defense, the lines of her uniform so sharp they looked new each time she moved. Her voice, when it came, was crisp without being loud. Objection to characterization. The defense contends Commander Callaway acted within the scope of her authority under the rules of engagement, given the emergent intelligence of potential noncombatants in the target structure. "Overruled," Blake said, almost pleased to say it. "Proceed, Colonel." Hargrove paced the space between counsel tables and the witness stand as if measuring it for carpet. "Commander Callaway," he began, for the record. Name, rank, assignment. She didn't look away from him, didn't look toward the gallery, didn't look at the screens. "Lieutenant Commander Revere Callaway, Naval Special Warfare. Team lead at the time of the operation designated Blackfish." "Team lead," he repeated, filing it into the air. "And as team lead, you believed your judgment superseded the chain of command." No, the word was unadorned. "I believed my judgment applied to the circumstances that changed." Hargrove's mouth twitched. "Let's talk about those circumstances." He gestured toward the display, and the technician scrubbed back 20 seconds. "What exactly did you observe that your superiors did not?" "Intelligence updates indicated possible civilian presence inside the target building," Callaway said. "Thermal signatures matched non-combatant clustering. The timing didn't align with the brief pattern of life." "You made that assessment with certainty?" "With enough certainty to keep my team from violating ROE and the law of armed conflict." "In your mind," Hargrove said, "you were the only adult in the room." "In my mind," Callaway said, "I was responsible for the people under my command and anyone caught in our crossfire." In the first row sat Admiral Thaddeus Northcroft, posture so straight it looked like an accusation. He kept his hands clasped, lips thin, eyes fixed on Callaway, as though he were trying to see through uniform wool and skin. Behind him, the gallery had filled with uniforms of every shade and field, the curious and the concerned arranged by rank and habit. A young civilian aide in the back corner moved a pen with surgical neatness across a yellow legal pad, head down, occasionally glancing up at Callaway with a look that wasn't curiosity. It was inventory. The opening morning flowed in its procedural rhythm. Exhibits admitted, objections denied, acronyms spelled out for the record, and then left to float through the air like confetti that never landed. The heat signature footage played again. The transcript printed again. Over and over, a looping reminder that machines make pictures, but people make decisions. Winfield rose when she had room to wedge an argument into the schedule. Your Honor, the defense requests permission to introduce Commander Callaway's operational history as context for her risk assessment. The court will not retry her career, Blake cut in. We are interested in what occurred on April 18th. Nothing before, nothing after. Denied. Respectfully, the pattern. Denied, Blake said again, and the word landed like a stamp on paper. He did not look at Winfield when he finished the word. He looked at Callaway to see if she would flinch. She didn't. Her thumb found the scar and kept its quiet orbit. When the first witness left the stand, Hargrove took his time, choosing a second one. The empty seconds stretched. In them, the room found new ways to dislike Callaway. Someone coughed. Leather creaked. A fountain pen clicked twice, then stopped, as though remembered. Prosecution calls Commander Revere Callaway, Hargrove announced finally. The oath was quick and familiar. She sat with the same control she'd had at the table, hands folded, breath even. Commander, Hargrove said, would you characterize yourself as risk-averse? Risk-appropriate, Callaway said. Your evaluation. He lifted a manila folder from the lectern with the care of a man showing a cat to a guest, suggests hesitation under pressure. My evaluation over 15 years suggests reliable decision-making under pressure. Let's be specific, he said. On Blackfish, you refused. Did you feel overwhelmed by the moment? No. She let the word live its full life before moving on. I felt responsible and informed by new data. He smiled a small smile that was all teeth and no warmth. New data. Commander, are you aware that during complex operations, analysis is often incomplete? That leadership requires commitment in uncertainty. Leadership requires judgment, she said. Commitment comes after that. And yet you defied a direct order. I complied with the ROE and the law. The order would have violated both. Something subtle shifted behind Hargrove's eyes then. A change from the sport of questioning to the work of breaking. He stepped closer, voice flattening. Would you say your sensitivities influenced you? Your compassion, perhaps? Your objection, Winfield said, already on her feet, already hot. Irrelevant and improper. Overruled, Blake said. The commander's decision-making is at issue. Hargrove cocked his head. Permission granted, knife sharpened. Answer the question, Commander. My sensitivities, Callaway said, kept men alive across 3 theaters. They did not keep me from doing my job. He leaned an elbow on the rail like he had all day to spend. And yet, he lifted a finger toward the screens. There is your voice. Cannot comply. Say it with me, would you? She didn't. The silence made the point for her. If anyone in the gallery expected anger from her, they were disappointed. Callaway's brand of refusal didn't flare. It settled. It had the patient energy of a tide, the kind that moved ships without raising its voice. By late afternoon, the room smelled faintly of coffee and old carpet. They cycled through an intelligence officer and a mission planner. Each time, Callaway's counsel eked out a small acknowledgement. Yes, there was a line in the pre-mission packet about possible non-competence. Yes, there was a footnote about pattern-of-life deviations. Yes, someone had flagged a concern, though moderate and uncorroborated clung to it like barnacles. During one of those exchanges, Callaway's gaze drifted, not out of boredom, out of habit, to the bench. A corner of a manila folder peeked from under Judge Blake's papers. Stamped in red, eyes only, embossed at the top, a sigil she hadn't seen in years. It was a simple symbol, clean lines, a shape you could draw with a finger on a fogged window. She felt it before she recognized it, the way an old injury announces rain. Her thumb paused on the scar, then resumed. To anyone watching, nothing changed. Members, Hargrove said, drawing attention back as if it had ever left him. Let us return to the moment of refusal. The audio again. The same exchange, carved now into everyone's hearing. Mantis Actual, you are cleared hot. Execute. Negative command. cannot comply. Hargrove looked up at Blake as the last word evaporated. No further questions for today. Blake shuffled his papers with meaning. He enjoyed the sound. Counselors, he said, we will adjourn until tomorrow at 0900. Before we break, Commander Callaway stand. She did. Blake let the silence steep. When he finally spoke, he didn't bother to round the corners of the words. This court has seen nothing to suggest you are anything special, Commander, he said, voice heavy with a scorn he didn't try to hide. You are not exceptional. You are weak, a liability to the men and women who do their duty without flinching. A frown touched Winfield's face. A ripple moved through the gallery like wind crossing tall grass. Callaway took the sentence like she took everything else, forward-facing, shoulders back, breath even. Her thumb stilled on the scar. Then, deliberately, she set both hands palm down on the table and looked at the judge until he looked away first. Court is adjourned, Blake said, and struck the gavel as if it could make the room forget what he'd just enjoyed saying. The audience rose, metal chair legs squeaking in chorus. The screens went black. The camera's red light kept its mute vigil. Callaway remained standing a half-beat longer than protocol required. Long enough to watch Blake sweep that eyes-only folder into a stack. Long enough to catch the way Admiral Northcroft didn't follow the crowd to the main doors, but slipped out a side exit with a man whose shoes didn't match his suit. Long enough to notice the young aide in the back stop writing mid-sentence and look straight at her, as if ticking off an item on a list only she could see. Winfield touched her sleeve. We'll regroup, she murmured. Callaway nodded. On the way out, her thumb found the old line in her palm again, like checking a compass point you already trust. The scar said, steady. The folder said, soon. The second day began the way military proceedings always begin, on time, without warmth. The gallery had grown since the day before. More uniforms. More brass. The murmur of pre-hearing conversation was low but taut, like rope under tension. A handful of senior officers had taken seats near the back, their presence heavy with unspoken judgment. Lieutenant Commander Revere Callaway walked and flanked by her counsel, Major Alara Winfield. Callaway's uniform was as immaculate as yesterday's, her posture a diagram in discipline. She didn't glance at the gallery. The gallery, however, couldn't help but glance at her. Judge Blake entered and took his seat with the same clipped efficiency he used for everything. His expression was unreadable if you didn't know contempt when you saw it. The first item on the docket was procedural, motions from the defense. Winfield stood. Your Honor, the defense renews its request to call character witnesses from Commander Callaway's former unit to establish operational context for her decision during Operation Blackfish. Denied, Blake said without pause. Operational security. Additionally, the defense objects to the inclusion of a psychological evaluation conducted without proper notice to counsel. Blake barely looked up. The evaluation was ordered for these proceedings. It is admissible. Winfield's lips tightened. Callaway, by contrast, didn't flinch. If the judge expected visible frustration, he'd be disappointed. Colonel Hargrove rose, manila folder in hand. Prosecution calls Commander Revere Callaway to the stand. She moved with deliberate precision, took the oath, and sat. Hargrove began with familiar territory. Her training, deployments, commendations. It felt almost like respect until he shifted tone. Commander, Hargrove said, would you describe yourself as cautious? I describe myself as calculated, she replied. And yet, according to Captain Warren's evaluation, you demonstrate decision paralysis under pressure. Agree or disagree? Disagree. Your team was chosen for Operation Blackfish because of the high stakes. Did you feel the weight of that responsibility? I always do. Then why refuse a direct order? Because new intelligence indicated civilians in the target building. Proceeding would have violated both the rules of engagement and the Geneva Conventions. Hargrove stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to be personal but loud enough for the gallery to hear. Would you say your female sensibilities influenced your hesitation? The air in the room shifted. Several officers in the gallery stiffened. Objection. Winfield's voice cut through the tension. Inappropriate and irrelevant. I'll allow it, Blake said, tone almost bored. Decision-making is central to the case. Hargrove waited, enjoying the silence. My sensibilities, Callaway said evenly, have kept my teams alive through 3 wars. My gender has never been a factor in my effectiveness. And yet you froze, Hargrove pressed. I made a tactical decision based on intelligence, she countered. That's called leading. The exchange continued for nearly 2 hours. Hargrove circled back repeatedly to her refusal, to the evaluation, to moments he hoped would crack her. But her composure never broke. Then, in response to a question about precedent, Callaway mentioned a past mission, Operation Silverfish. Not relevant. Blake interrupted immediately. With respect, Callaway said, it directly informed my. The court has ruled, Blake said sharply. Move on. Her eyes flicked to the judge's bench, where the corner of a manila folder peeked from beneath his papers. Eyes only. Embossed in the corner was a symbol she hadn't seen in years, one she knew intimately. She kept her expression neutral, but her focus sharpened. When court adjourned, the atmosphere had grown heavier. Officers lingered in the gallery longer than necessary. The young civilian aide from the first day was there again, now sitting behind the prosecution table. She watched Callaway with a kind of assessment that wasn't casual curiosity. In the defense room afterward, Winfield threw her files onto the table. They're boxing us in. Without your full service record, I can't give the jury context. Blake's shutting down everything that could help. It won't matter, Callaway said quietly. Winfield studied her. Why do I get the feeling you're holding back? Some things aren't in the record, Callaway said. Some things never were. On day 3, the hostility was palpable. The gallery seemed to be handpicked for its disapproval. High-ranking officers filled the benches, their presence as much a message as an observation. Blake opened the session by denying the defense's latest motion for operational testimony. Then he accepted the contested psychological evaluation into evidence over Winfield's objection. Hargrove resumed his questioning, picking at the same threads until the fabric should have frayed. Callaway didn't give him the satisfaction. When he asked how she would characterize her refusal, if not paralysis, she answered without hesitation, moral clarity. Moral clarity, he repeated, voice tinged with mockery. Above orders? Above operational objectives. Some lines shouldn't be crossed, regardless of who gives the order, she said. The room was silent long enough for the meaning to sink in. When she stepped down from the stand, Blake leaned forward. This court has seen nothing to suggest you are anything special, Commander. You are not exceptional. You are weak. The words might have been intended as the final blow. Instead, Callaway's eyes locked onto that folder again, and something changed, not in her posture, but in her intent. For the first time since the trial began, she looked ready to move the battle onto ground of her choosing. By the time the 3rd morning of the court-martial arrived, the air in the corridor outside Courtroom 3 felt different, charged, expectant. Officers who hadn't attended a single day before were now gathered in clusters, voices low, eyes sharp. There were more suits than uniforms, and more security than the trial's profile should have warranted. Lieutenant Commander Revere Callaway walked the hallway like a stone moving through a stream. Conversations paused as she passed. She wore her dress blues with the same precision as the first day, but there was a new tension to her presence, a coil held in check. Inside, the gallery had transformed. Admiral Northcroft was back in the front row, this time flanked by 2 men in dark suits who looked more like bodyguards than staff. The young civilian aide Callaway had noticed earlier now sat directly behind the prosecution table, pen poised over her pad, but eyes locked on Callaway. At exactly 0900, Judge Blake took the bench. If he was unsettled by the high-level audience, he didn't show it. This court-martial is now in session. Having reviewed the evidence and testimony, the court is prepared to render judgment in the matter of United States Navy versus Lieutenant Commander Callaway. Before he could continue, he added, military justice allows the defendant a final statement before verdict. Commander, do you wish to address the court? Major Winfield's hand brushed Callaway's sleeve. A silent "are you sure?" But Callaway was already rising. "I do, Your Honor," she said. "I request permission to identify myself properly for the record." Blake frowned. "Your name and rank are already established." "Not all of it, sir." Her voice had a new edge. "May I approach?" Blake gestured for her to proceed. She stepped up to the microphone in front of the bench. For a moment she stood still, her posture shifting subtly, the way a fighter adjusts their stance before striking. Then she leaned forward and whispered, "Obsidian Dusk." The effect was immediate. A colonel in the third row dropped his pen. It clattered across the floor. Admiral Northcroft's face lost its color. The aide behind the prosecution table rose to her feet. The low murmur in the room spiked into urgent, hushed voices. Blake blinked. "What did you say?" She met his eyes and spoke louder. "Obsidian Dusk. November 2017 to March 2020. Task Force 88. The reaction was chaos wrapped in discipline. Phones appeared in hands. Quiet, coded phrases slipped into secure calls. Several officers moved toward the exits, only to be stopped by Northcroft's men. Blake banged his gavel. "Order. This court will have order." A man in a dark suit strode to the bench and handed Blake a secure phone. Blake's face went from irritation to confusion to something that looked very much like fear as he listened to the voice on the other end. "This court will recess for 1 hour," he announced, his voice tight. "All present will remain in the building." He stood so quickly his chair rocked backward, then disappeared into his chambers. The gallery erupted into quiet clusters of urgent conversation. Northcroft walked directly to Callaway, his formal composure replaced with something almost reverent. "Commander," he said, "it's been a long time." 3 years, 2 months, she replied. "We thought you were dead." "Some days I was." Winfield appeared at her side, eyes wide. "What just happened?" "They remembered who I am," Callaway said simply. In the anteroom during recess, Winfield pressed for answers. "You invoke something classified enough to stop a court-martial in its tracks. I need to know." "How's your clearance?" Callaway asked. "TSSCI Yankee White," Winfield said. 3 years ago, I commanded a unit that didn't exist," Callaway told her. "We handled operations no one else could touch. Black budget. No paper trail. Obsidian Dusk." Winfield's brow furrowed. "And our last mission, Operation Silverfish, was compromised. Intelligence failure. I recommended abort. Overruled. My team was ambushed. All 7 killed. I was the only survivor." Winfield's voice softened. "Blake. He was in the authorization chain," Callaway said. "He signed off on the mission knowing the intel was questionable." When the court reconvened, Blake was gone. In his place sat Admiral Lyra Kendrick, a legend in naval intelligence. "This tribunal is now in session," Kendrick began. "In light of newly accessed classified information, this court-martial is dissolved by direct order of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. All records of these proceedings are now top secret." She looked directly at Callaway. "Commander, please approach." From a leather case, Kendrick withdrew Callaway's sidearm and handed it back to her, a symbolic restoration of authority. "On behalf of the United States Navy, I extend our apologies. Your refusal in Operation Blackfish was not insubordination. It was the act of a commander preventing a repeat of catastrophic circumstances." Kendrick's gaze swept the room. Former Judge Advocate Blake had undisclosed conflicts of interest related to prior operations. "His conduct is under review." Callaway stood at attention, her face composed. For the first time in years, she felt the weight she'd been carrying begin to shift. As Kendrick adjourned the dissolved court, Winfield stepped close. "Reassignment?" she asked. Callaway glanced at the gallery, where the aide in civilian clothes now wore an expression of something between respect and calculation. "Some ghosts," Callaway said, "don't stay buried." Admiral Lyra Kendrick's office on the top floor of Naval Intelligence Headquarters had a view that made the harbor look like a model set. Ships in neat rows, cranes in slow, deliberate motion, the morning sun painting the water in ribbons of gold. It was the kind of view that made most people pause. Commander Revere Callaway did not. She stood at attention in her immaculate dress blues, waiting for Kendrick to finish reading the file open on her desk, a thick leather portfolio stamped with a classification so high most officers would never hear of it, let alone hold it. "Have a seat, Commander," Kendrick said at last. Her voice was steady, carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades giving orders to people who didn't dare question them. Callaway sat, posture straight, but relaxed enough to show she was here as more than just the accused from yesterday's tribunal. "I've been reviewing your complete service record," Kendrick said, tapping the portfolio. "The real one, not the sanitized version in the Navy's personnel files. 15 years of exemplary service. The last 3, of course, don't exist on paper." "That was my understanding," Callaway replied. "Until yesterday," Kendrick said. "Your decision to invoke Obsidian Dusk rattled the chain of command from the Pentagon down. I had the Secretary of the Navy on the phone before midnight." Callaway waited. "Let's talk about Silverfish," Kendrick continued. "Your team inserted into territory where we officially had no presence, chasing intel on an imminent attack. That intel was, at best, incomplete. At worst, it was manipulated. You recommended abort 3 times during planning." "And was overruled," Callaway said flatly. Kendrick nodded. "By a committee that included then Captain Blake. 20 minutes after insertion, you were in an ambush. 7 operators killed. You critically injured. You still managed to make out." "I didn't complete the mission parameters," Callaway said. "The mission was compromised before it began," Kendrick countered. "Your survival was the only success." Silence settled between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. "Last month, Blackfish had the same signatures," Kendrick said. "You recognized them. You refused the order. And Blake, now wearing a judge's robes, saw an opportunity to bury you before anyone could connect the dots to Silverfish." Kendrick stood and moved to the window. "He failed. Which brings us to why you're here." She returned to the desk and pulled 3 envelopes from a drawer. "First option," she said, sliding one forward. "Honorable discharge with full pension and benefits, effective immediately. Your record amended to reflect commendations, though the details stay classified." She placed the second envelope on the table. "Second, reassignment to Naval Special Warfare Development Group as an instructor. No field work, but your expertise would shape the next generation." Finally, she placed the third folder between them. Unlike the others, it bore no markings at all. "Third, reinstatement to active operational status under direct Pentagon authority. You'd command a new unit, with oversight by me alone. No committees. No politics." Callaway's eyes stayed on the unmarked folder. "May I have time to decide?" "You have until 0900 tomorrow," Kendrick said. As Callaway stood to leave, Kendrick added, "Blake resigned this morning. The investigation into his role in Silverfish is ongoing. It won't be public, but his career is finished." That afternoon, Callaway walked the perfect rows of Arlington National Cemetery. The headstones reflected the low light in neat columns, names and dates carved into white silence. She found the section she'd come for, 7 markers, all official records describing separate incidents, in different places and years. She knew the truth. They died together, under her command, on a mission no one acknowledged. From her pocket, she withdrew 7 smooth stones she'd collected from the beach at dawn. One by one, she placed them atop each headstone, an old team ritual that meant, "I remember. I carry you with me. Thought I might find you here," a voice said behind her. Kendrick approached, dressed in civilian clothes. Callaway still straightened instinctively. "At ease, Commander." "This isn't official," Kendrick said, standing beside her. She read the names silently. "They didn't die because of you. They died under my command," Callaway said quietly. "They died because they were sent into an ambush," Kendrick corrected. "There's a difference." They stood together in the stillness. The breeze moved through the trees, stirring the leaves like a distant whisper. "Have you decided?" Kendrick asked at last. "I'll take the third option," Callaway said, "on 3 conditions." Kendrick gestured for her to continue. First, I select my own team. No interference in personnel. Granted, within security limits, Kendrick said. Second, I have direct communication with you. No intermediaries. That's why I'll be your oversight, Kendrick said. And third, Callaway said, looking back at the headstones, the families of my men get full benefits, as if the truth about their service were public. Kendrick considered. No medals, no public recognition. But I can ensure financial security and education benefits for their children. That's acceptable, Callaway said. Kendrick nodded toward the graves. That's why we need you back. Not everyone at the top has forgotten what honor means. Callaway handed her the signed reinstatement papers. What's the new unit called? Obsidian Dusk is compromised. That's your first assignment, Kendrick said. Pick a name no one will remember until they need to. They walked together toward the gates. At the threshold, Kendrick's tone shifted. Your first mission will have two objectives: the external threat and finding who fed your team false intelligence during Silverfish. We clean our own house first. For the first time in years, Callaway felt not just determination, but purpose. The building at Quantico looked like any other federal office. Bland facade, tinted glass, flag out front. Nothing in its appearance suggested the kind of clearance it required. Commander Revere Callaway's new credentials granted her access, without a word from the guards. Inside, an elevator waited at the far end of the lobby. The keypad had no numbers, only a card reader and a slot for a key. Callaway swiped her card, inserted the small steel key Kendrick had given her, and the doors closed without a button pressed. The descent was silent. When the doors opened, the space was nothing like the exterior had promised. A wide operations center stretched before her, banks of monitors, tactical maps pinned with digital overlays, glass-walled briefing rooms, and a comms hub that hummed with quiet purpose. 5 people stood at attention in a line. Commander on deck, one of them called. At ease, Callaway replied automatically, taking in their faces. The woman who'd spoken stepped forward. Lieutenant Vivian Marquez, Signals Intelligence. I served with Chief Talbot before his assignment to Obsidian Dusk. It's an honor, ma'am. Callaway nodded. The others introduced themselves in turn. Gunnery Sergeant Miles Rourke, Force Recon, Tactical Operations Specialist. Ensign Tasha Lee, UAV and Surveillance Systems. Petty Officer, First Class Julian Ortega, Demolitions and Breaching. Lieutenant Amir Das, Cyber Operations. Each had a service record strong enough to earn a place anywhere in Special Operations. Each had some personal tie to the men she'd lost, an unspoken reason they were here beyond skill set. Who selected this team? Callaway asked. I did. Kendrick's voice came from behind her. She stepped into the room, not in uniform, but in civilian attire that somehow still carried the weight of rank. Per your condition, you had the final say. These are my recommendations. I thought you'd want people with both talent and skin in the game. Callaway studied them. No one looked away. Our designation? Rourke asked. Callaway thought of the Arlington graves, the smooth stones on white marble, the unacknowledged service. Echo Vigil, she said finally. Because we stand watch for those who no longer can. There was a brief silence, the kind that meant the name had landed. Kendrick gestured toward the glass-walled briefing room. You have a mission to hear about. Inside, a table was covered with printed satellite images, coded intercept transcripts, and a small stack of sealed folders. Marquez began the briefing. Signals intercept from last week matched patterns found in the Silverfish operation. Same encryption signatures, same origin masking. Callaway's gaze sharpened. Domestic. Possibly, Marquez said. Too early to confirm, but the footprint matches. Which means whoever fed you false intel 3 years ago might still be active, Kendrick said. And still positioned to do it again, Callaway added. Rourke pointed to a map overlay. We've got a potential external target in play, classified shipment moving through a port city overseas. Our job is to confirm whether the leak connects to the Silverfish signature before the op launches. Callaway's mind was already moving ahead, logistics, insertion methods, exfil plans. Timeline. "72 hours, Kendrick said. Callaway looked around the table at her new team. "Understood. We'll run our own intel verification before we touch that target. If this leak is domestic, I want proof before we're anyone's pawn again." Kendrick gave a small, approving nod. "Exactly why you're here." When the meeting broke, Callaway lingered, watching her team disperse to their workstations. They moved with quiet efficiency, no wasted steps, no wasted words. She saw flashes of a unit she'd lost, different faces, same grit. At her desk in the corner of the operations center, she spread out a photo from years ago. 8 operators in dusty gear, faces sunburned, eyes sharp. 7 of them gone. She slid the photo into the inside pocket of her jacket. "You're still here with me," she thought. "And we've got work to do." Across the room, Marquez called out, "Commander, first intercept analysis is coming in. You're going to want to see this." Callaway walked over. The screen displayed a communication log, fragmented, but clear enough to make her jaw tighten. Code phrases she'd seen before. One sender's ID string she recognized instantly. "Confirm this," she said. "Already running it," Marquez replied. "But if it's right," Callaway finished for her, "then our leak isn't just domestic. It's someone with a clearance level high enough to bury an entire unit." She straightened, scanning the room, feeling the old rhythm return, orders forming, contingencies building. This was what she'd been built for. In the corner of her vision, Kendrick was watching her, expression unreadable but satisfied. Callaway turned to her team. "We don't just find this leak. We cut out root and stem. Wheels up in 24. Brief your areas. Be ready." As they moved to obey, Callaway allowed herself one breath of stillness. The mission ahead was dangerous, the kind that would never appear in headlines. But this time, she wasn't walking into it alone, and she wasn't walking blind. In the world above, Arlington's white stones stood silent, the names carved into them waiting for the living to remember. Down here, in a room without windows, Echo Vigil was already on watch. The shadows were moving. And now so was she,